Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Dark Narrations. Tonight I am taking you deep into the kind of darkness that only rises during Halloween, the one night of the year when the veil between our world and something ancient grows unbearably thin. In this episode, we're rediving into 8 of the most disturbing true Halloween horror stories ever shared by the people who lived through them, and still cannot explain what happened. These are not campfire tales, not recycled folklore, and not the kind of stories you find in cheap paperbacks. These accounts come directly from the survivors themselves, people who stepped into the chill of an October night and encountered something that followed them long after dawn, from unsuspecting strangers stalked by figures that shouldn't exist, to families who discovered why some houses should never host Halloween parties, to wanderers who approached the wrong road, the wrong house, or the wrong shadow at exactly the wrong moment. Every story tonight carries the same uneasy message. Halloween is not just a holiday. For some, it is a warning to respect the privacy of those who are brave enough to share their experiences. Some names and locations have been changed, but every chilling detail remains exactly as they described it. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Scary Dark Narrations for daily true horror content that will haunt your nights and make you rethink every sound in the dark. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because when the Halloween night whispers, you'll want to be here to hear it. The first thing I remember from that night wasn't the cold or the candy, or even the costume mask rubbing raw against my cheek. It was the feeling that someone unseen was already watching us before we even left the first street. That strange, weightless tension hung in the air like static, brushing over my skin every time the wind shifted, as if something was quietly rearranging the night behind us. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just nerves because it was our first Halloween without adults hovering over us, but the truth was deeper, older, and far more unsettling, like a whisper pressed too close to the back of my neck. Even now, a decade later, that same eerie pressure creeps up on me whenever I think about those woods. I guess the mind never forgets the exact moment it first sensed real danger lurking in the dark. And from the very start of that night, I knew something was wrong, even if I didn't understand it yet. Halloween used to be one of the few nights where everything felt simple. Walking streets we'd known our whole lives, laughing loudly without caring who heard, and feeling just old enough to pretend we weren't afraid of anything. Alex kept adjusting the pumpkin mask over his white sheet ghost costume, while Ben kept picking straw out of his scarecrow gloves. And I, looking ridiculous in my creepy clown makeup, tried to pretend I didn't notice how jittery my hands felt. The houses glowed warm and familiar, porch lights flickering like beacons that pushed back the October dark. I remember thinking the world felt small and safe, wrapped in a blanket of laughter and sugar. We were just kids wanting to run wild for a few hours without any rules. Yet behind that innocent rush, I kept catching the slightest sensation of movement across the street, just at the corner of my eye. Something stayed close no matter how many turns we made. Something that wanted us to know it was there. We convinced ourselves it was nothing at first, brushing it off as part of the Halloween crowd, just older kids walking the same direction, maybe heading to the good houses. But each time we cut through a new street or took a sharp turn toward a cul-de-sac, they appeared again, drifting into view just far enough away to pretend they weren't watching. Their costumes were dark and vague, silhouettes more defined by shadows than fabric, and their size made them seem too tall for teenagers, yet too casual to be adults. They never rushed, never got too close. They simply moved when we moved, a slow, deliberate mirroring that made the small hairs along my spine rise straight up. I remember asking myself why the night suddenly felt colder around them, as if they carried a pocket of fog wherever they went. And each time we stopped at a house, I felt their eyes on us, even if I couldn't see their faces beneath their masks. Alex was the first to admit it out loud, whispering nervously that they'd been behind us for at least 3 streets. Ben tried to laugh it off, though his voice cracked enough to betray him. And I could tell his pulse was racing because he kept fumbling with his candy bag like his hands were shaking. We tested it on purpose, turning one way, then another, looping blocks we'd already walked, trying to catch them in coincidence. But they followed each curve perfectly, drifting from house to house only when we looked back, as if they were performing a show designed to convince us they were harmless. Maybe we should have gone straight home then. Maybe we should have called someone. Instead, we made the worst decision we could have made that night. We listened to Alex. He said we should cut through the woods, the old trail that connected our neighborhood to the next one over, and lose them in the dark. It sounded stupid the second the words left his mouth, yet the thought of staying on the streets with those two silent, Stalking figures somehow felt worse. We'd walked that trail multiple times in the day, and it was always simple. A straight path lined with tall trees and thick brush, with only a few turns before the exit. But at night, the entrance looked like a mouth, a black open mouth swallowing the last traces of daylight. Still, fear makes kids think strange things, and we convinced ourselves that the shadows of the woods would protect us more than the open roads. So we slipped off the sidewalk and hurried toward the path, hoping, praying they didn't see us cross. The moment we stepped beneath the canopy, the world shifted. The moonlight disappeared behind the branches and the temperature dropped instantly. Like the forest had sealed itself shut behind us. The dirt under our shoes softened into something damp and uneven, and the darkness swallowed our costumes whole, turning us into ghostly outlines moving through a tunnel of pitch black. I kept waiting for my eyes to adjust, but they never did. The trail ahead looked like ink, thick and unyielding, with no flashlights and only faint glimpses of the path. Every step felt uncertain. My breath fogged in front of me even though the air shouldn't have been that cold. And something about the silence felt wrong, as if the forest was holding its breath. We stopped when the uneasiness became too much to ignore, standing shoulder to shoulder in the darkness, debating quietly whether we should turn back. The moment we fell silent, I heard something behind us, a slow, measured crunch of gravel under boots, deliberate enough to echo faintly between the trees. Alex grabbed my arm, Ben whispered my name, and then, as if the dark itself pushed forward, two shapes emerged from the path behind us. Tall, slow, unmistakably the same two figures we were trying to escape. Their silhouettes didn't move like people walking. They glided, long smooth strides, without hesitation, closing the distance with unnatural calm. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. We didn't wait to confirm who they were. Terror snapped like a branch underfoot, sharp and immediate, sending us sprinting off the trail and into the trees. Branches clawed at my face, roots twisted under my shoes. The woods became a blur of shifting shadows, and I could hear our breaths overlapping in panicked gasps. Behind us, the heavy footsteps quickened into a run. Ben shouted that they were chasing us. I didn't need him to say it, I could hear it. The rhythm was too fast, too determined, pounding closer with each step like a nightmare gaining shape. We ran blind, directionless, crashing through darkness as the forest closed in around us. Then, silence swallowed everything. The silence didn't comfort me, it strangled me. One moment the footsteps were thundering behind us, and the next the forest went dead still. The air thick like the world had paused mid-breath. I leaned against a tree, chest heaving, trying to listen past the pounding in my ears. Alex crouched beside me, clutching his mask, while Ben kept looking over his shoulder as if the darkness itself might lunge at him. My lungs burned as if I'd swallowed ice, and the cold began sinking into my bones in a way that felt unnatural. I kept asking myself if the silence meant we'd lost them, or if they were standing so close we just couldn't hear them breathing. The thought alone made my throat tighten. We stayed still for only a few seconds before a single snap of a twig shattered the quiet. It came from the left, this time, not behind us. The next sound came from the right, a soft rustle like someone dragging their fingertips across dried leaves. My pulse spiked so sharply it made my vision blur. Whatever was hunting us wasn't walking in a straight line anymore. It was circling, closing in slowly. The air around us felt charged, heavy, like it was thickening with every passing moment. I whispered for us to run again, but my voice cracked, and the sound barely escaped my throat. Even speaking felt like it might alert them to exactly where we were, though deep down I knew they already knew. When we bolted again, the forest erupted with motion behind us. Branches snapped, leaves kicked up in frantic bursts. The footsteps were faster now, sharper, heavier, like they were sprinting full force. My costume snagged on brambles, tearing fabric and scraping skin, but I kept running, pushing through anything that tried to slow me. Every time I dared a glance behind, I saw nothing but darkness swallowing the path we'd just crossed, as if the woods were helping whoever was chasing us. The forest stretched unnaturally, looping in ways that didn't make sense, and no matter how long we ran, I never spotted a clear exit. Doubt crept in a cold, horrifying whisper asking whether we ever entered the woods we thought we knew. We stopped again, gasping for breath, and that silence returned just as suddenly as before, sharp and oppressive. My heart hammered so violently I wondered if the sound alone would expose us. Ben collapsed to his knees, tears streaming, insisting he'd heard them breathing just inches behind him. Alex kept turning in circles, whispering, "They're not human, they're not human," over and over, like he was trying to convince himself he wasn't going insane. I wanted to deny it, to say we were imagining everything, but the air around us felt wrong. Too cold, too still, too aware of us. It felt like the forest itself was listening. When footsteps broke the silence again, they didn't come from behind, or from the side, they came from directly ahead. Two silhouettes stood between the trees, perfectly still, blocking whatever path we were hoping to take. Their bodies looked stretched slightly too tall, their shoulders narrow and slanted, and their heads tilted with an unnatural slowness. They didn't speak, they didn't breathe. They simply watched, their masks glowing faintly with whatever moonlight slipped between the branches. I felt my knees buckle beneath me as the dread became physically crushing, a weight pressing straight down onto my chest. Whatever they weren't just following anymore, they were waiting. We didn't think, we reacted. We ran in the opposite direction, crashing through bushes and stumbling over roots, ignoring the pain tearing across our legs. And this time, the woods finally gave us something, a sliver of light breaking through the trees ahead, faint and distant but unmistakably real. A street, a way out. We sprinted toward it like our lives depended on it, because they did. The moment my foot hit pavement, the cold vanished so abruptly it made me shiver. The air warmed, the silence lifted, and when we turned around, nothing stood between the trees. No footsteps, no figures, just darkness settling back into its natural shape, as if the forest had never held anything at all. We wandered in a daze until we recognized Ben's neighborhood. My legs shook so violently I nearly collapsed on his lawn. Inside his house, the lights felt too bright, the rooms too safe, like we'd stepped out of a nightmare and into a place not meant to coexist, with the terror still clinging to our skin. None of us spoke for a long time. We just sat by the windows, peering through the curtains every few seconds. My pulse refused to settle, my hands wouldn't stop trembling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods hadn't let us go. It had simply released us for the moment. I thought the night was over when I finally fell asleep on the floor by Ben's bed. But sometime around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up instantly, not groggy, not confused, just awake, like something had pulled me to consciousness. A second later, I heard it. Slow, synchronized steps moving up the driveway. 2 sets. Heavy, careful, deliberate. I looked at Ben, and he was already staring wide-eyed at me, having woken up at the exact same moment. We didn't speak. We didn't move. We just listened to the quiet crunch of footsteps approaching the window, and then stopping directly beneath it. We waited, breath held, hearts thundering, but when we finally found the courage to look through the blinds, no one was there. Sometimes I wonder if they followed us out of the woods that night, or if the woods themselves did. And even now, every Halloween, I still feel that same cold weight pressing against my back, like something tall and patient is standing just behind me, waiting for me to notice. Would you dare return to this place? From the moment I saw her pale face beneath that torn bridal veil, something inside me tightened, a quiet, instinctive warning that whispered through my nerves like cold breath on the back of my neck. Halloween had always been noisy and harmless in my neighborhood, but that night carried an edge I couldn't name, an unease that clung to the air the way fog clings to old gravestones. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just fatigue after hours of handing out candy, but the way her hollow eyes tracked me felt too deliberate to ignore. The porch light flickered slightly as she stood there, unmoving, her small bag extended with mechanical stiffness. And even then, as she walked away with the man waiting on the sidewalk, something told me she wasn't done with me. That thought settled into my chest and stayed there, heavy and unwelcome. As the evening faded, the neighborhood gradually quieted until only distant laughter and the shuffle of collapsing decorations filled the street, dissolving into the darkness. I enjoyed the calm after the annual chaos. It reminded me of the quiet I used to crave after long work shifts, back when my life still held some predictable rhythm. I swept stray candy wrappers from the living room, trying to ignore the strange tension that had lingered since the girl left my porch. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from friends, simple small talk that helped ground me in something normal, but every so often, without meaning to, I'd replay the moment she'd lifted her head, the unnatural stillness, the too white paint, the weird almost adult posture beneath a child-sized costume, and every replay made me feel like I'd missed something important, something I didn't want to name. By the time I realized how late it had gotten, the house had settled into deep quiet, the kind that makes every distant creak feel like a breath just outside your field of vision. I moved slowly, almost cautiously, turning off each light and locking each window with deliberate care, as though some part of me already expected to be watched. The upstairs bathroom felt warm and safe under the bright light. and for a few minutes, the shower steam washed the unease from my thoughts. Water drummed rhythmically against the tile, grounding me in something simple and familiar, something that didn't whisper or stare. But when I stepped out and checked my phone, everything inside me tightened again. A motion notification from my doorbell camera, timestamped just 10 minutes earlier, pulsed on the screen like a warning heartbeat. I froze, breath hitching. As my thumb tapped the playback, the video loaded slowly, creating a hesitation that made my pulse throb painfully in my throat, like time itself resisted letting me see what waited on that screen. The porch looked empty at first, a blank stretch of shadow, gently swaying Halloween decorations, a hint of wind moving across the frame. Then, in the far left corner, she appeared for just a second, the dead bride, leaning forward, testing the edge of the camera's view. Her face hovered at the border like a ghost trying to slip between dimensions, then jerked back abruptly, as if she remembered she wasn't supposed to be seen. That subtle, animal-sharp movement made my stomach twist violently. She hadn't been trick-or-treating, she had come back deliberately. I threw on my clothes with shaking hands, each movement rushed and clumsy, my mind locked on one panicked thought: she knows I'm alone. I raced downstairs, skipping steps, nearly slipping as I reached the front door. The porch was empty when I flung it open, but not comforting empty, more like the air itself was holding its breath, hiding something just beyond sight. Wind scraped dead leaves across the concrete with a dry, whispering rasp that made the hair on my arms rise. I stepped back into the doorway, scanning the yard, the street, the sidewalk, anything that could make sense of what I'd just seen. But the silence only deepened, thick and watching. Then I heard it, a faint sound behind me, not loud, not dramatic, but unmistakably human, a soft shuffle, a whispered breath, the kind of sound made by someone trying not to be heard. Fear stiffened my entire spine as I turned slowly, staring into the dark hallway stretching toward the back rooms. That hallway had always felt normal, boring even, but now the shadows pulled too heavily, too still, as if something inside them held shape and intent. And then the whispers came, two distinct voices, soft at first, conversational, as though two people stood in my living room discussing something in hushed urgency. I didn't breathe, I didn't move, I only listened as their quiet murmurs slithered through the darkness toward me. Panic hit me in a single wave, primal, overwhelming, electric, and I acted before I could think. I spun around, shoved open the front door, and sprinted into the night with my heart pounding so violently it blurred my vision. My footsteps echoed across the pavement, each one fueled by a terror I couldn't fully understand, yet felt bone deep. I didn't stop, I didn't look back. I ran until the houses around me looked unfamiliar, until the porch lights became distant stars, until my lungs felt like they were tearing. Only when I reached the far end of the neighborhood did I pull out my phone with trembling hands and dial the police. And as I tried to steady my breathing, the world around me held unnaturally still. Then, silence swallowed everything. When the next notification buzzed through the quiet, the vibration against my palm felt like a jolt from an electric wire, sharp, cold, and final. I glanced at the screen, already knowing what I would see, because dread has a way of preparing the mind before the truth arrives. The doorbell camera had activated again, and when I opened the feed, my blood iced instantly. The girl and the man were running out of my house, actually sprinting like they had been inside long enough to realize I'd escaped. Seeing them in motion made everything feel more real, more predatory, more intentional. And in that moment, one thought cut through everything. They weren't there to steal. Police sirens eventually pierced the night, their distant wails growing louder as I stood under a street lamp that felt too bright, too exposed. Officers searched my house room by room, their flashlights slicing through the darkness I'd abandoned minutes earlier. But every time a beam cut across an empty corner, the relief never came. If anything, the emptiness made the place feel worse, as if something had just slipped out of reach before they arrived. One officer tried reassuring me, suggesting it could have been a prank, but even he looked uneasy when he watched the footage. The way the girl moved, the way the man hovered close behind her, the way their hands were empty as they ran, it didn't look like a prank. It looked like they'd been hunting. Later, when the officers discovered the small tool marks near the side entrance door leading into the garage, confirmation hit me like a hammer. They had broken in, quietly, methodically, while I was showering. The knowledge hollowed me out, leaving my limbs buzzing with the kind of fear that doesn't fade, the kind that burns itself into memory. The back hallway suddenly made sense. The whispers, the presence. They had been in my home long enough to speak to each other, to move freely, to watch me walk around unaware, And the worst part wasn't that they entered. It was that they waited. Why? What were they waiting for? Why hadn't they gone through drawers or stolen anything? Why had they come back at all? Those questions tangled in my mind until they didn't feel like thoughts anymore. They felt like warnings. When the officers finally left, the house felt like a stranger wearing my home's skin, familiar walls wrapped around an unfamiliar quiet. I walked room to room with trembling steps, unable to shake the sensation that the shadows were leaning a little too far toward me, the darkness settling in shapes that weren't there hours before. Each creak of the settling wood made me flinch. Each draft brushed my neck like passing footsteps. I kept telling myself it was over, that they had fled, that the police presence scared them off. But my instincts whispered something else, something colder. They left because they had what they wanted. But what had they taken? Sleep felt impossible, but exhaustion eventually dragged me onto the couch, where I lay in the faint glow of a single lamp. Every time my eyes drifted shut, that pale face resurfaced in the darkness behind my eyelids, eyes too steady, smile absent, posture wrong. At some point, I sat up abruptly, heart pounding, because I realized something I hadn't noticed earlier. When she came to the door the first time, her bag barely moved when I dropped candy into it, like it was already full, or weighted, or carrying something else entirely. That detail dug into me like a thorn I couldn't pull free. And with every passing second, a single question echoed louder. Who brings a full bag to collect candy? Days passed, but the police found nothing. No identities, no fingerprints, no leads. Neighbors reported seeing the pair earlier that night, always together, always watching from a distance, their silhouettes lingering near driveways or motionless on sidewalks. But only my house had been breached. Only my hallway held their whispers. Only my camera captured them fleeing. That realization made my home feel targeted, chosen. Maybe they saw me alone. Maybe they watched the lights go off. Maybe they timed everything by my habits. Or maybe they chose me long before Halloween even began. Weeks later, just when life began settling back into a fragile normal, I received another doorbell notification while I was at work. My hands went cold instantly, breath locking in my throat as I opened the live view. The porch was empty at first, nothing but wind stirring dead leaves across the concrete. Then the camera glitched a flicker, a distortion, a brief white blur near the left edge of the frame, and then a single small object rolled into view. My breath stalled as I leaned closer. It was a piece of white fabric, torn, thin, and dusted with faint white powder, the same shade as her painted skin. I stared at it, heart racing, because it wasn't just fabric, it was a strip from the veil she'd worn. And the way it moved, pushed slightly by the wind, looked almost like a gesture, an invitation, or a warning that she knew I wasn't home. I ended the feed and stared at my phone with a hollow ache spreading through my chest, because deep down, I understood one terrifying truth: they had returned. Not for the house, not for what was inside it, for me. And if they found me once, they would find me again. Would you dare return to this place? I knew something was wrong the moment the air felt heavier than it should have, like the house itself had taken a slow breath and was waiting to exhale. Halloween never meant much to me anymore, but that night, the quiet felt unnatural, almost staged, as if the walls were listening for us. Aiden sat on the edge of my bed scrolling through his phone, the glow painting his face in cold blue light that made him look strangely distant. I kept telling myself it was just a normal night, just a bored teenagers killing time while our parents were gone. The house should have felt familiar, warm even, but a faint uneasiness clung to every shadow like something waiting in them. I tried ignoring it, but the longer we sat there doing nothing, the more restless I felt, like the night had plans for us. And the worst part was that, I think a part of me already knew something was coming. After pacing around my room for a bit, I suggested we go to the basement and put on a movie, just to feel like we were doing something Halloween appropriate. The basement was always a little unsettling, unfinished floors, stacked boxes, and that faint smell of cold concrete that felt older than the house itself. Still, we slipped into the darkness, turned off the lights, and let the TV glow spill across the room like a shallow pool of safety. As the movie started, the sound design echoed strangely, bouncing around the basement like the space was larger than it really was. I told myself it was just old acoustics, but Aiden kept glancing behind him as if expecting someone to step out from the shadows. I teased him for it, though I didn't feel as confident as I sounded. And the longer the movie played, the more I felt that prickle on the back of my neck that whispered, "You're not alone down here." When the first thump echoed from upstairs, we froze at the same exact second, our eyes locking with that silent question. Did you hear that too? I paused the movie, letting the quiet press in on us until I could hear my own pulse behind my ears. The sound didn't fit anything in the movie, so I rewound, replayed, and listened carefully. But nothing matched. No footsteps, no impact, no low boom. Something was moving in our house, slow and deliberate, like it didn't care if we heard it. Aiden shifted closer to me, and even in the dim light, I saw the fear thin his breathing. I wanted to believe it was the house settling, but each thump carried a rhythm that felt disturbingly human, and the dread settling into my stomach felt more real than anything on that screen. We crept toward the basement stairs, each step feeling louder than the last as the silence tightened around us. From the bottom step, we listened again and heard the unmistakable pattern of someone walking above us. The footsteps moved with eerie patience, as if whoever it was knew exactly how to pace each step for maximum tension. Aiden grabbed my arm, whispering my name under his breath, though even his whisper sounded too loud in the heavy dark. Then a voice, deep, steady, chillingly familiar with a name it shouldn't have known, called out from upstairs. Aiden, it said again, like a parent calling a child home, soft but filled with a strange authority. In that moment, fear didn't just rise, it sharpened. The voice drifted through the house with uncanny confidence, repeating Aiden's name like it had said it before, like it had practiced it. Every syllable echoed through my ribs, vibrating with something that felt older than a simple break-in. Aiden kept shaking his head, mouthing, "I don't know him," over and over as if trying to convince himself as much as me. My instincts screamed to hide, to disappear, to become nothing but breath and stillness. We darted to the utility closet, squeezing ourselves between the heater and a stack of dusty crates. The metal walls hummed faintly beside us, a low vibration that matched our frantic breathing. And outside the thin door, the house seemed to wait with its lungs full. The basement door creaked open with excruciating slowness, letting in a bar of warm upstairs light that stretched across the basement floor like a searching hand. I held my breath until my chest hurt as footsteps descended, each one landing with calm, terrifying certainty. Through the crack in the closet, I saw his shadow first, tall, deliberate, moving like he already knew where we were. He didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't even seem curious. He simply observed the basement like it belonged to him. When he saw the TV still paused on the screen, he tilted his head slowly, like he was studying a clue made just for him. Hearing him say Aiden's name again made something inside me curl inward, tightening like a knot pulled too hard. I could feel Aiden trembling beside me, and all I could do was try to stay as silent as the dust around us. Then, silence swallowed everything. The quiet didn't feel empty, it felt conscious, like the house was holding its breath with us, listening to every micro-sound in the dark. I could hear the man's shoes grind lightly against the floor as he stepped closer to the middle of the basement, his movements carrying a horrible patience. Every time he paused, I felt the air thicken, as though he was turning his head, scanning the room, seeing things we prayed he wouldn't. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I worried he would hear it through the thin metal closet door. Aiden squeezed my arm, his fingers ice cold, and the silent question in his eyes made my stomach twist. Why did the man know his name? The question scratched at my mind like claws on wood. He moved toward the boxes stacked near the wall, flipping open one that I recognized immediately, the one filled with old photos and family keepsakes. Watching his shadow sift through objects tied to my childhood made my skin crawl with a new kind of dread, a violation deeper than simple trespassing. It was like he was looking for something he already believed was his, and the thought chilled me. He lingered there for a long moment, fingers brushing through memories he had no right to touch. When he whispered Aiden's name again, softer this time, it felt almost intimate, like a promise more than a call. Aiden's breathing turned shaky, and he pressed his forehead against the metal heater to steady himself. I wanted to do the same, to disappear into the walls, to unexist. Eventually, the man walked back up the stairs, each step slow, as if savoring the tension he'd planted. The moment the basement went quiet again, the silence became oppressive, too thick to navigate, too intentional to ignore. We stayed frozen in the closet, terrified he was waiting just beyond the door, listening for movement. The house above us groaned as if responding to him, and faint footsteps drifted through the halls like he was pacing, mapping the place by sound alone. Every few minutes, a creak or shuffle broke the stillness, and each one felt like a countdown to something worse. My legs ached from staying still, but the fear anchored me in place. And just when I thought we might stay like that forever, The house finally settled into a terrifying stillness. I slipped out of the closet first, moving on numb legs, careful not to disturb a single box or shadow. The basement felt different now, colder, stretched thinner, like the presence of the man had permanently warped the air. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, terrified that even the soft click of the screen would call him back. Aiden hovered behind me, jittery, scanning every corner like he expected the man to materialize from the dark. Calling for help felt surreal, like my voice didn't belong to me anymore, like I was speaking from underwater. Each ring echoed in my ears, dragging out time. When I finally got through, I could barely form sentences. By the time officers arrived, the house looked painfully normal, no broken windows, no forced doors, nothing disturbed except what he'd touched. They searched the place with professional calm, but the silence left behind felt wrong. Too empty, too clean. It was like the man had left nothing behind but the impression of his voice echoing down the stairs. Aiden looked hollow, drained, unable to explain why the man knew his name, but the way he stared at the floor made me wonder if there was something he wasn't saying. I kept glancing toward the staircase, half expecting that deep voice to drift down again. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little too far, as if waiting for him. And deep down, I felt something unresolved coil around my nerves. The authorities never found a trace of the man, no footprints, no fingerprints, not even a hint of how he got inside. For weeks afterward, nighttime footsteps echoed in my dreams, slow and heavy, as though still pacing those upstairs halls. Aiden stopped coming over as often, claiming school, sports, excuses that felt thin and frightened. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to whisper his name again. I tried convincing myself we were safe, but safety felt like a fragile illusion, stretching thinner with each passing night. The basement stayed dark, untouched, as if the house didn't want us down there anymore, and the silence that filled it seemed to breathe. To this day, I still don't know who that man was, or how he knew Aiden's name so perfectly. Sometimes, late at night, I hear faint footsteps above my room, even when I'm home alone, slow and deliberate, as if retracing his path. I tell myself it's nothing, just old wood flexing in the night, but deep down, I know the rhythm. Aiden never talks about it anymore, but the terror in his eyes the last time I asked told me everything. Maybe the man wasn't there for me. Maybe he never was. Maybe he's just waiting for the right night to come back. Would you dare return to this place? The air smelled faintly of decaying leaves, sharp and cold against my skin, as the last traces of daylight bled across the empty streets. Halloween had always carried this electric thrill for me, that mix of excitement and fear that made the ordinary feel just slightly off balance. Jason and I had insisted on going out, even though most kids our age had already decided to skip it. The crunch of our sneakers on scattered leaves and the occasional distant bark of a dog kept us aware we were alive, and yet something about the quiet between houses felt wrong. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the thrill of being in neighborhoods we'd never explored before. We moved past familiar homes, the carved pumpkins casting flickering, uneven lights across cracked sidewalks. Every porch held the scent of sugar, the laughter of parents calling kids back from the street. But as we turned down a narrow lane that led into a small forested road, the familiar warmth of our neighborhood faded. Massive houses loomed behind thick shadows, their windows dark except for the occasional reflection of the moon. I noticed how the road narrowed, the trees pressing closer to us, their skeletal branches scratching at the sky. Jason's footsteps slowed, a subtle unease in his gait I couldn't ignore. The first mansion we approached had a single dim porch light, swinging slightly in the wind, as though hesitant to illuminate the entryway. I rang the bell, expecting the cheerful clatter of candy bowls or someone calling out Happy Halloween, but nothing responded. A chill ran down my spine as the silence pressed against us, thick and almost alive. We shrugged and moved to the next house, our laughter trying to fill the void, but the laughter felt hollow. Even the crickets seemed to have vanished, leaving the road unnervingly still. With each unresponsive mansion, the shadows grew longer, stretching unnaturally along the cracked asphalt. Our excitement from earlier faded, replaced by that creeping sense that we were being observed, that the darkness wasn't just around us, it was waiting. I started noticing small oddities, the way a branch tapped rhythmically on a window, or how the wind carried whispers that weren't there. Jason's usual jokes came out flat, swallowed by the heavy quiet, and I felt my stomach knot tighter with every step. Somewhere deeper into the forest, An orange glow flickered through the trees, and our hearts leaped. It was a house, at last, that seemed alive with decorations, lights, and promise. The mansion's wooden door was ajar, revealing a yawning darkness inside, shadows pooling at odd angles along the hallway. I knocked anyway, the sound echoing into the void, and waited. 30 seconds stretched, each one dragging like hours. Then a man appeared, his thin hair gleaming faintly, eyes unnaturally wide, smiling too deliberately. "Happy Halloween," he said, voice low, smooth, yet hollow. He gestured for us to come in, the shadows swallowing his motion. A quiet beat and silence swallowed everything. We froze, instinct and instinctive fear battling curiosity. Jason tried to speak, his words tangled and hesitant, while the man's eyes followed our every micro-movement. He lifted his hand again, a gesture both inviting and commanding, the dim hallway behind him stretching into opaque darkness. The smell of old wood, wax, and something faintly metallic tickled my senses as my mind screamed to leave. Every horror story I had ever heard played in the back of my mind, wrapping around the pit of my stomach. I nodded subtly to Jason, and without looking back, we bolted from the porch, leaves scratching at our ankles, branches whipping past our faces. We continued down the forested road, hearts hammering, adrenaline keeping our limbs from shaking. The houses were still silent, the decorations mocking us with their cheerfulness from afar. The dark embraced us fully now, the road narrowing, tree roots cracking through the asphalt like twisted veins. Somewhere, deep in the shadows, a car sat silently, black as the night itself. Its presence wasn't threatening at first, almost like an abandoned relic, but then I caught the figure in the driver's seat, eyes wide, unblinking, staring straight at us. Fear made us run faster, the distant houses behind us shrinking into nothing, the road ahead an uncertain promise. The car's headlights snapped on as we passed, stabbing through the dark like twin daggers, and the engine growled low. A predator waking, her legs pumped frantically, leaves and twigs snapping beneath our shoes, shadows chasing us in rhythm with our panic. We didn't look back, didn't dare, but the sound of the engine pressing closer made our skin crawl. I felt my chest tighten, every nerve screaming that the ordinary world we had left moments ago had disappeared completely. The familiar intersection we had hoped for seemed miles away, yet we ran, driven by some primal knowledge that stopping meant something far worse. A sudden calm settled as we stumbled onto the edge of a normal neighborhood, streetlights flickering dimly above our heads. Our breathing slowed slightly, the adrenaline draining, replaced by a hollow, unrelenting dread. Was the figure in the car real, or a trick of fear twisting shadows into something alive? Jason whispered something incoherent, but I shook my head, unable to form words, only able to feel the weight of being hunted in silence. The houses here seemed mundane, warm, normally yet my mind could not escape the memory of that open door, of eyes wide and unblinking, and the faint metallic scent of something wrong lingering in the air. We didn't speak again until we reached Jason's house, slamming the door behind us, hearts still racing. The normal hum of television and household chatter felt distant, alien. I couldn't shake the image of the man, the hallway stretching endlessly behind him, a hallway that might still be waiting for anyone foolish enough to step inside. The question lingered in my chest. How had he appeared and vanished so seamlessly, and why had the decorations been just a lure? My pulse refused to slow, and every creak or thump in the house made me flinch. The world had returned to normal outside, but inside, something in me had shifted irreversibly. Later, alone in my room, I kept seeing that open door in my mind, the dim orange glow bleeding into blackness, stretching endlessly. Was it even a house, or some trap disguised to look familiar and comforting? My rational mind told me it was just a man and an empty house, but the unease had taken root deep, whispering that rationality could be deceived. I could feel it watching, the wide eyes of that figure carved into my memory, waiting for another night, another victim daring to step inside. The thought made me shiver uncontrollably. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the floorboards of that mansion creaked in rhythm with my heartbeats. Shadows seemed to bend at the corners of my vision, and the faint metallic smell invaded my senses again. Questions without answers clawed at me. Why had he chosen to reveal himself? Why had the door been open? Why did the forested road stretch endlessly with no one else around? Halloween had always been fun, but now it felt like a veil over something darker, a thin layer hiding something that existed just beyond the comforting glow of our porch lights. Weeks passed, but the memory remained unrelenting. I avoided that side of the city entirely, and Jason never mentioned the event again. Yet even in broad daylight, in crowded places, My eyes would dart to shadows, my ears straining for unnatural sounds. Was it paranoia, or was it real? The open door haunted me, the invitation never rescinded, waiting silently for the next pair of curious souls. I never trick-or-treated after that night, and a small, gnawing part of me wanted to return, to see what truly lurked inside the darkness. But fear had claimed its place, and caution had won, and yet I still think about that house, about the man with the unnaturally wide eyes, and I wonder, how many of us have ignored the signs? How many open doors do we walk past every day without realizing they're watching us, waiting for us to cross that threshold? That Halloween, the world felt safe, then unsafe, then entirely changed, and the question lingers, persistent and chilling. Would you dare return to this place? I felt something was wrong the second I stepped into my apartment that night, a faint heaviness in the air, almost like the place had been holding its breath without me. My shift had dragged until 9:30 p.m., so I just made a quick bowl of cereal for dinner and headed straight to my room where my gaming setup glowed softly in the dark. The monotone hum of my PC was comforting, familiar, almost enough to drown out the unease creeping up my spine. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. But the silence in the rest of the apartment seemed to still, and I couldn't help noticing it. After finishing my cereal, I slipped into my chair and logged on, expecting my friends to join soon since they all worked late shifts too. Their icons were still grey, so I launched a game alone to kill time. My room felt warm from the PC fans, the LEDs casting slow pulses of color across the walls, but it didn't keep me from glancing at my door every now and then, listening for something I couldn't name. Mid-match, my phone buzzed, and I instinctively checked it, thinking it might be one of my friends telling me they'd be late. Instead it was a random number, unfamiliar, plain, almost to normal. I ignored it, but my pulse ticked a little faster anyway. The phone buzzed again less than a minute later. Same number, same blank little bubble on the screen. I let it ring, watching it with a strange prickling under my skin, because scam numbers never call twice from the same line that quickly. When it buzzed a third time, I felt a cold ripple crawl across my arms as I finally answered but stayed silent. The other end wasn't silent, though not exactly. I could hear wind, faint, constant, like the phone was pressed up against someone walking outside in the dark. I whispered hello after a long stretch of quiet, but nothing answered me. No breathing, no movement, just that wind that somehow felt too close. I hung up after 15 seconds with a lingering nausea pulling at me. When my friends finally came online, I immediately brought it up, tossing out accusations before I even said hello. They joked about it for a second, but even over the headset, I could tell they were genuinely confused. None of them knew the number, none of them were calling me, and none of them thought calling someone 3 times just to breathe wind sounds into the phone was even remotely funny. We eventually brushed it off and got back into gaming, and oddly enough, once I joined their call, the mystery number stopped trying to reach me entirely. A weird relief settled in, and the night drifted by like nothing had happened. Hours later, around 2 a.m., we all got tired and logged off. The sudden quiet of the room made my ears ring a little, like the silence was pushing back against the sound that had been filling it all night. I stayed seated for a moment, eyes unfocused on the blank loading screen, when my phone vibrated again. The bright notification flashed that same number. But this time, it wasn't a call. It was a picture message. My chest tightened, slow and heavy, as I unlocked my phone and tapped the image. The photo opened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I was staring at myself, sitting in that exact chair, wearing the same hoodie, leaning forward in the same posture taken from directly behind me. It was from moments ago. The lighting in the picture matched the exact second before I ended the call with my friends. The frame captured the back of my head, the curve of my shoulders, even the faint reflection of my monitor in my glasses. But I hadn't heard a camera. I hadn't sensed anyone behind me, and the small, grainy blur in the upper corner almost looked like fingers, holding the phone. I spun around so fast my chair slammed into the desk. Nothing, no one, just the window on the opposite wall, still cracked open from earlier because I'd wanted cool air while gaming. For a moment I clung to the hope that maybe, hopefully, the picture had been taken from there. Maybe someone had been outside. Maybe no one had been in the room with me. I rushed to the window and leaned out, scanning every shadow in the yard below, but no movement stirred. I locked the window and shut the blinds, my heart thudding like something trapped in bone. Back at my desk, I stared at the picture again, feeling my skin crawl with a dread so sharp it felt physical. My hands shook slightly as I saved the image and sent it to my group chat, begging silently for one of them to claim it as a joke. But they didn't. They didn't even make a joke about it. They all told me to get out, to call the cops, to run. And that was the moment something inside me broke away from the last bit of denial I was holding onto. I cracked open my bedroom door slowly, my breath shallow as I peered into the dim hallway. The house was unnaturally quiet, not the comfortable quiet of home, but the kind that listens back. I stepped forward cautiously, feeling a cold certainty gathering deep inside me. I needed to check the rest of the house before calling the police. Needed to know if the danger was already near me. And as I turned the corner toward the living room, that cold certainty solidified into pure terror. My front door was wide open. Then silence swallowed everything. I stepped back without meaning to, a jolt of instinct firing through my body as the open doorway gaped like a wound in the house. The night outside felt impossibly dense, the darkness pushing inward as if it had been waiting right there. I couldn't explain it, but something told me with absolute clarity that whoever had taken that picture hadn't just broken into the house. He was still here, close, watching from just beyond the thin slice of hallway separating me from the living room. My breath hitched, shaky and uneven, as the realization pressed deeper into my chest. I turned and bolted back toward my bedroom, the shadows shifting with every step as though the house itself was exhaling behind me. My door slammed shut, and I twisted the lock with trembling fingers. Then I backed away slowly, staring at the thin wooden barrier between me and the unknown figure I knew was just feet away. My heartbeat was pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking the floor. Each second stretched thinner and thinner until it felt like time might snap altogether. Then the footsteps began, soft, slow, deliberate. Each step landed with a weight that felt calculated, as if he wanted me to hear every inch of his approach. I pressed myself against the far wall, my hands numb, my breath held in a locked cage of terror. The steps stopped right outside my door, and for a moment, nothing moved. Not the shadows, not the floorboards, not even the air. Then the knocking started. 3 slow taps, each one spaced too evenly, too calmly, like whoever stood there wasn't trying to break in, but trying to be invited. The handle twitched. Then again, a soft metallic rattle, then another knock, firmer this time, almost impatient. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the police, my voice barely a whisper as I told them someone was inside my house. I backed away from the door, keeping my eyes locked on the handle as it stilled for a moment, then moved again, slower this time, as though a finger traced the cold metal. The dispatcher's voice felt distant as she told me officers were on the way. I barely heard her over the faint sound of breathing, not mine, on the other side of the door. Then, suddenly, silence. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. The house felt quiet in a way that felt impossible, like the sound had been sucked straight out of the walls. I didn't know if he'd left or if he was standing perfectly still, waiting for something, waiting for me. The dispatcher asked if I was safe. I couldn't answer. I wasn't even sure if speaking might draw his attention again. The silence stretched on until it felt like my body couldn't physically hold it anymore. Then the officers arrived, knocking loudly, calling out, breaking the frozen tension that had wrapped itself around the entire house. They found no one, no footprints, no sign of forced entry, no proof anyone had been inside, only the open door and the picture on my phone, the only thing that proved any of this had actually happened. They told me it was likely a stalker or prank, told me to stay somewhere else for the night, told me they'd keep watch on the neighborhood, but none of their words felt real. None of their reassurances could erase the cold imprint of those footsteps approaching my door, or the memory of that breathing, so close it felt like it brushed my skin. For weeks afterward, I kept the blinds closed and checked every lock twice before sleeping. Every small noise jolted me awake. Every passing shadow looked too tall, too still, too familiar. But the real terror settled in much later. The night I was scrolling through my camera roll and accidentally opened that picture again. I zoomed in on the dark blur in the upper corner, the one that looked like fingers holding the phone. But it wasn't fingers, it was a reflection, a faint, distorted reflection on my monitor, showing a shape behind me. A shape that didn't match the silhouette of a person. A shape too tall, too thin, with angles that bent wrong in the dim light. I stared at it until my breath turned shallow, my skin crawling with the truth I had ignored. Whatever stood behind me wasn't human, and if it wasn't human, then it never needed the door to enter the house, and it never needed to leave. I still get calls from that number sometimes. Never a voice, never a message, just the sound of wind, and something moving inside it. Would you dare return to this place? The first thing I noticed that night wasn't the cold, or the rustle of leaves scraping along the pavement. It was the strange, heavy stillness clinging to the air, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I remember thinking Halloween felt different this year, quieter somehow, as if something was watching from just beyond the streetlights. Jason's text had come out of nowhere after days of silence, and even though we were too old to be trick-or-treating, there was this weird comfort in the idea of pretending we were still kids for one more night. I didn't question it, not then. Maybe I should have. By the time we met up near the edge of the neighborhood, I was already feeling oddly detached, like my mind hadn't fully settled into my body. I had thrown on a cheap black sheet and a scream mask because I hadn't cared enough to put real effort into a costume, and most of my friends had the same lazy energy. A plastic Obama mask, a store-bought Joker suit. But the one that stood out was Jason. He didn't speak when he joined us, didn't wave, didn't make a joke, he just appeared. The torn clothes, the black bodysuit hiding his face completely, the fake blood smeared across his chest. The whole thing was so strange that I laughed at first, thinking it was some try-hard horror cosplay. But the longer I looked at him, the more something cold slid down my spine. We walked through the dozen houses on the block, collecting candy like kids again, trying to shake off the awkward reactions from the homeowners. Some smiled politely, others hesitated before dropping candy in our bags, their eyes lingering uneasily on the silent black-masked figure behind us. I kept trying to catch Jason's eyes through the fabric, but the bodysuit covered everything. There wasn't even the faintest outline of a face. He moved slowly, almost deliberately, as if each step was calculated, and though we joked and laughed, he didn't say a word. When the basket of oversized candy bars appeared outside one house, the guys acted like it was a challenge. They took handfuls, almost emptying the whole bowl, and I tried to play along, but something about Jason standing motionless at the edge of the yard felt wrong. I glanced at him, expecting at least a headshake or some kind of annoyed reaction, but he didn't move until we were already walking away. That was when a small ripple of unease passed through me, a tremor at the back of my mind that whispered something wasn't right. Kyle eventually pushed the idea of moving to another block, but my gut twisted harder with each minute. I wanted to go home, to shake off the weird mood building inside me, but before I could say anything, Jason finally spoke. His voice was muffled from behind the mask, deep and strangely flat, like someone imitating a voice they didn't fully understand. He said he'd stolen alcohol from his parents and knew a place where we could drink. The guys cheered like idiots. I hesitated, wanting to object, but the moment I felt his hidden eyes on me, the words died in my throat. I told myself it was just nerves, just Halloween, and followed anyway. The trail at the end of the block swallowed us fast. Our phone flashlights cut only thin blades through the dark, and the silence around us pressed in like something alive. I tried making small talk with Jason, hoping to break whatever weird tension was hanging around him, but he stayed at the front of the group, leading us deeper and deeper, never slowing, never answering. Every few minutes I'd catch him glancing back at us, but the featureless mask made it impossible to tell if his expression changed. After 20 minutes, we reached an opening under a canopy of bushes, a cramped space littered with trash, empty bottles, and what looked like an abandoned sleeping bag. The air smelled like old smoke and damp soil, and something about the place felt used, like someone had been living there. When I asked Jason if this was really the spot, he nodded slowly, raising one hand to point at the small gap in the leaves where the moonlight spilled through. The sky was beautiful, yes, but even that didn't calm the unease clawing through my chest. It felt too isolated, too convenient. We drank anyway. The vodka burned going down, harsher than any alcohol I'd had before. Kyle and Drew started laughing, stumbling around, and even though I tried to join in, something felt off. Jason didn't drink. He just sat on an old log, elbows on his knees, watching us with unsettling stillness. I could feel his focus locked on our movements, tracking every wobble, every laugh, every careless gesture. The world slowly began to tilt, thicker and heavier than it should have been, and a buzzing started behind my ears, faint at first but growing. My vision blurred around the edges as I realized how wrong everything felt. I turned toward my friends only to find them sprawled on the ground, unconscious, too fast, too sudden to be normal drunkenness. Panic clawed at my throat, but my limbs felt heavy, disconnected, as if my body wasn't mine anymore. When Jason finally stood and approached me, I felt a cold wave of clarity slicing through the haze. He knelt down, bringing his faceless mask inches from mine, and for one horrifying second I felt his gloved fingers brush my cheek, almost gently. Then, silence swallowed everything. The world snapped into sharp, terrifying focus as my heartbeat thundered in my ears, each pulse breaking through the haze like an alarm I couldn't shut off. The moment Jason's fingers touched my skin, the thin fabric of his glove brushing lightly along my jaw, a sickening jolt went through me. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Not of him, but of danger. Real danger. My limbs were heavy, my thoughts foggy, but instinct screamed loud enough to cut through the drug weighing down my veins. I tried to lift my arm. It didn't move. I tried to speak. Only a broken whisper slipped out. The figure tilted his head slowly, studying me with a stillness no normal person had. His breathing was calm, controlled, too steady for someone who'd just watched 3 teenagers collapse at his feet. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, catching faint outlines of his face beneath the bodysuit. Not features exactly, but something shifting slightly, like he was adjusting his expression behind the mask. I felt the ground sway beneath me. My pulse fluttered. Something warm trickled down the back of my neck. I wasn't sure if it was sweat or blood. A soft clicking sound came from his throat, a quiet noise, deliberate, like he was testing the voice he wanted to use next. I tried to lean away from him, tried to pull air into my lungs, but each breath felt thick and slow. His gloved hand rose again, this time hovering near my collarbone, but before he could touch me, a harsh snap echoed across the canyon. A flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade, then another, then a third. The faceless figure went still, as if someone had pressed pause. For a moment, I thought he was going to hurt me anyway, but instead he spun and sprinted into the bushes with a speed that didn't seem human. Branches rustled violently, footsteps pounded up the trail, voices shouted, and then everything plunged into darkness again as my vision finally collapsed inward. When I opened my eyes, bright white replaced the moonlight hospital lights, sharp and sterile. The sheets felt rough against my fingertips. My head pounded like someone had cracked it open and stuffed cotton inside. I tried sitting up, but nausea forced me back down. A police officer at my bedside turned at the sound of my groan and asked if I knew where I was. I didn't, not at first. The memory came back in pieces, the path, the canyon, the sleeping bag, the vodka burning my throat, the faceless figure watching us like he was waiting. For the moment we couldn't fight back. Kyle and Drew were in the room next door, alive. They'd been unconscious longer than me. The officer asked what I remembered, and when I told him about Jason, he stiffened. He exchanged a look with a nurse, then told me something that made my stomach drop so violently I thought I would faint. Jason hadn't sent those messages. Jason had lost his phone 3 days earlier. Someone had picked it up. Someone had gone through it, read our group chats, and used it to impersonate him. Used his voice, his habits, the way he typed. Someone who knew how to blend just enough to feel familiar. Someone who wanted us to follow him willingly. And we had. The officer asked if I could describe the man. I said no, because there was no face, just that black bodysuit, just those torn clothes, just the stillness, the unnatural quiet, the way he never moved unless he meant to. They checked the canyon, searched the bushes, combed the trails, even dragged the creek, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no fibers, no clothing left behind. It was like he had dissolved into the night. Later, when we met back at my place, none of us spoke loudly. We kept our voices low, as if speaking too clearly might call him back. Kyle said he remembered a bitter aftertaste in the vodka chemical. Sharp Drew said he saw the figure lean toward him before he blacked out, like the man was checking if he was fully unconscious. And me, I remembered his hand brushing my cheek. I remembered how calm he was. I remembered how he didn't run until he absolutely had to. As days passed, I started noticing things I'd never have cared about before. Footsteps that didn't match the pattern of my family's routine. Shadows near the windows that felt too tall, too still. One night I woke up convinced someone was standing in the corner of my room, barely visible, just waiting for me to fall back asleep. I turned on every light. Nothing was there, but the feeling lingered. The dread didn't fade. Halloween never felt safe after that. Trick-or-treating turned into something childish and distant, like a tradition from a life I no longer belonged to. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It wasn't the nightmares. It wasn't even the knowledge that someone had chosen us, watched us, followed us. The worst part was knowing he wasn't finished. Because sometimes, when I'm alone at night, my phone buzzes with a notification from an unknown number, a text containing only 3 dots, as if someone is typing, as if someone is waiting. As if someone is still wearing a face that isn't his. And every time I wonder, would you recognize someone pretending to be your friend? Would you dare return to this place? The first thing that warned me something was wrong was the way the night felt thicker than usual, like the air itself was holding its breath as I stepped outside in my cheap firefighter costume, plastic axe still smelling of packaging. I kept telling myself it was just the Halloween atmosphere, just the cold wind brushing my arms like damp fingers, but even then something in my chest whispered that tonight wasn't going to go the way I expected. I tried to shake the feeling off, telling myself my friends were waiting, the music was already playing, and I was just late. But as I stood at the curb, watching traffic smear into streaks of orange and white, the street felt strangely empty, and for a moment, I wondered if turning back would have been smarter. I didn't listen. When the Uber finally pulled up, the car looked like it had crawled out of an accident a week ago and never recovered, a silver Kia with a missing bumper, deep scratches that looked almost like claw marks, and windows tinted so dark they swallowed the streetlight glow. The driver rolled the window down slowly, the glass screeching like it hadn't been used in years, and he said my name in a low, shaky voice. He wore sunglasses even though the sky was black, and a sickly rash spread across his cheek like dried moss. His hair was oily, sticking to his forehead as if glued there by sweat, and for a second I froze. My stomach twisted, telling me to walk away, to wait for another ride, to do anything but get in that car, but I didn't want to judge him. I didn't want to be rude. So, against every instinct I had, I climbed inside. The smell hit me first, a mixture of damp clothes, gasoline, and something sour, something almost like spoiled breath, trapped in stale air. He didn't speak at first, merely kept his eyes forward, hands trembling slightly on the wheel as he merged back into traffic. Then he asked about my costume with a smile that didn't fit his face, thin lips stretching too far as he let out an awkward, squeaky laugh. I explained the party, the last-minute costume, all the usual small talk, but instead of laughing it off, he launched into a rambling story about never fitting in, how people ignored him in school, how he spent years in silence. His voice shook, swelling with anger as he slapped the steering wheel, then his own forehead, muttering how stupid he'd been. Each hit made the car swerve, tires skidding too close to the shoulder, and I felt panic crawl up my spine like cold insects. I begged him to focus, to keep his eyes on the road, and after a long moment, he apologized in a whisper, his breath wheezing like he'd run a mile. When we finally pulled up to the house, he didn't unlock the door. He just stared, not at me, but at the glowing windows where laughter leaked into the night. His jaw twitched as he whispered something I couldn't hear, something about missing out, about how it should have been. The silence stretched until my heartbeat felt louder than his idling engine. Then click, he unlocked the door, and I stepped out as carefully as if the ground might break. I walked toward the house without looking back, but I felt his eyes on me the entire way, burning through the tinted glass. And when I finally reached the porch, he was still there, engine humming, headlights dim like dying eyes. Inside, the party washed over me instantly. Warm light, cheap decorations, music vibrating through the floorboards, and the comforting chaos of voices and clinking cups. I drank fast to rinse the unease out of my system, letting the buyer settle the nervous tremor in my hands while I forced myself to relax. My friends were already laughing through karaoke, and the mood felt so normal, so safe that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the earlier fear. As the hours moved on, the room blurred with warmth and noise, the buzz in my head drowning out the unsettling memory of that grimy Kia, that rash-covered face, that anger bubbling just beneath the surface. For a while, I forgot. Then around 10 I saw him. A tall, stocky man in a dark hoodie sat in the corner of the living room, wearing a plastic Jason mask with scuffs across the forehead. His posture was too still, too controlled, like he was trying not to breathe too loudly. Everyone else was accounted for, so I scanned the room twice, wondering how he slipped in unnoticed. He didn't talk, he didn't drink, he didn't look around, he just sat there, watching. When I asked Rachel who invited him, she frowned and said I did. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I didn't know this man, but he knew my name. I approached him slowly, watching his shoulders rise and fall in shallow breaths. He didn't react, not even when I stood directly in front of him. I reached out to tap his shoulder and his hand shot up, gripping my wrist with a force that made my bones grind together. Pain shot up my arm and I yelled, jerking away, but he simply let go and returned to his frozen position. The room went quiet. Everyone stared, waiting for an explanation neither of us gave. I demanded to know who he was, and he rose to his full height, towering over me, taller than the doorway, hood shadowing his face except for strands of black, oily hair spilling out. Hair I had seen before. The realization hit me so hard my legs nearly gave out. Then, silence swallowed everything. The silence didn't last long because the man's chest suddenly shuddered, and he began to sob, loud, jagged cries that sounded wrong, like an adult imitating a child's breakdown. His hands shook as he clutched his head, the cheap plastic mask bending inward with each trembling breath. The crowd backed away instinctively, forming a semicircle around him, and I felt myself edging backward on instinct, my heart pounding so sharply it hurt. His sobs twisted into ragged screams, each one tearing out of him like something inside was trying to escape, and beneath the hood, more strands of greasy hair slipped free, the same oily matted texture I had stared at for a terrifying 20 minutes in the back seat of that Kia. The moment I saw it, a sharp jolt shot up my spine and every part of me knew it was him. The same man who stared at the house, the same man who whispered about missing out on life, the same man whose rage simmered beneath his skin like boiling tar. He had followed me here. He had walked into a house full of strangers because of me. The idea made my stomach twist so violently I thought I might throw up. When his screams abruptly cut off, the silence punched the air out of the room. He reached down slowly, too slowly, and unclipped the machete from his belt. It caught the orange glow of the string lights as he lifted it, and the blade shimmered unnervingly, like it was wet. I raised my hands, trying desperately to keep my voice steady as I choked out, "Hey, you don't have to do this. Just put it down." My words barely made it through my dry throat, but he looked right at me, eyes burning through the Jason mask's holes. His voice came out cracked and muffled, but the message chilled me straight to the bone. It wasn't supposed to be like this. You were supposed to understand. I had no idea what he meant. Understand what? Understand him. Understand his loneliness, his bitterness, his resentment toward every room that never welcomed him. I didn't know. But whatever fantasy he'd built up in his head, it was collapsing. The blade trembled in his grip. Then he threw it. The machete spun through the air, slicing past my ear so close I felt the air split beside my cheek before it crashed into the TV, shattering the screen in a violent burst of sparks and falling glass. Screams erupted around me. People ducked, stumbled, covered their faces, the air filling with the sharp sting of burnt plastic and fear. But before anyone could react further, the masked man bolted for the door, shoving past two guys who tried instinctively to block him. He ran into the night, disappearing into the darkness beyond the porch lights, his screams echoing down the street like something primal. No one chased him, no one even moved. We were frozen, breaths trembling, hearts pounding in a hollow rhythm. In the suffocating stillness that followed, I felt a strange ringing in my ears, as if the world had gone underwater. Rachel whispered, "Should we call the cops?" But her voice sounded distant, distorted, unreal. I couldn't answer. I just stood there shaking, replaying the moment he grabbed my arm, replaying his muttered words outside the house, replaying those greasy strands of hair slipping from his hood. Was he planning this from the moment he picked me up? Did he follow me because he felt some twisted connection? Or, and this question still crawls through my head at night, did he choose me long before I got into that car? We cleared out within minutes, each of us walking into the cold night with our hearts still hammering, the shattered TV still flickering behind us like an open wound. I didn't wait for anyone. I didn't say goodbye. I just wanted distance, as much as I could get between me and the house. Me and the memory. Me and the possibility that he might still be lurking close enough to hear my steps. The street felt too open, too quiet, and every shadow looked like a man in a hoodie. I didn't dare call an Uber. My skin crawled at the very thought. I walked home instead, jumping at every noise, feeling watched with every block I passed. And even now, I don't know what scares me more, the idea that he was my Uber driver, or the idea that he wasn't. Would you dare return to this place? The first thing that told me the night was wrong was the taste of the air. A faint chemical sharpness beneath the fake fog drifting across the porch, something that scraped at my throat before I even stepped inside. I remember thinking I should have mentioned it to Tessa, but she was smiling in that glitter-bright way she did when she wanted me to relax, brushing a streak of shimmer from her cheek as we finally walked toward the house. The music trembled through the windows like a heartbeat that didn't belong to the place, and the lights pulsed as if signaling us in. Even then, something inside me whispered turn back, but I ignored it like an idiot. We were already late because my cape kept catching in the seatbelt, and because Tessa would fix her makeup every time we hit a red light, tapping glitter under her eyes like she was preparing for battle. She looked incredible. Tall boots, raven hair, the kind of smirk that made me forget I hated parties. I kept telling myself it was fine, just 1 hour, maybe 2, and then we'd slip out early like we always did. I had no idea that the promise we made to ghost early if it got weird would become something far darker before the night was over. Inside, the house hit us like a riot, orange lights bleeding down the walls, fog thick enough to taste, strobe lights bursting like camera flashes from unseen corners. A scarecrow with beer breath slapped bracelets on our wrists, yelling something about an open bar, and the crowd surged around us in a chaotic wave. Paper bats swung from the ceiling in dizzy arcs, and the punch bowl smelled like pure sugar and gasoline. People danced, laughed, shouted, and everything felt too close, too hot, too fast. Yet we drifted with it, letting the noise swallow us whole. Tessa leaned into me and kissed my cheek, leaving glitter like stars across my skin, and I swear I could have stayed in that moment forever. But then, while scanning the room, I noticed them, 3 still figures at the back wall, wearing cheap black hoodies and blank plastic masks that reflected just enough light to seem faceless. Not Ghostface, not Jason, not any character, just nothing. Their silence carved a hole in the noise around them, and the one on the right tilted his head slightly, watching Tessa with a focus that cut through the room like a blade. I convinced myself they were just awkward guys, too shy to join the party, but then my drink tasted wrong. There was something bitter under the sugar, something metallic and numbing that crawled across my tongue and down the edges of my throat like frost. The floor swayed beneath me just enough for my knees to reset themselves, and the music warped in and out of tune as if played by an unseen hand. Tessa made a face, muttered that it tasted weird, but she finished it anyway like we both did, because this was supposed to be fun, because people around us were laughing, because we didn't want to ruin the night by overthinking things, and maybe because we trusted the world more than it deserved. Someone shouted shots, and glass syringes appeared, filled with red liquid that burned like cough syrup on fire. The crowd howled, the strobe tightened into a pulse that felt almost biological, and my heart sinks to its rhythm as if I were being rewired without my permission. I sent for another drink, and then the world tilted sharply, like a carnival ride that refused to stop. The rubber wolf head across the room turned to slowly, his movements buffering like corrupted video, and the edges of the room smeared together in long, melting streaks. A hand grazed my shoulder, and when I turned, one of the masked men stood inches from me. Up close, the mask was worse, the eyeholes empty, the mouth slit curved in a shape that felt wrong the longer I looked at it. He nodded at my cup like he was pleased. I set it down instantly. The music dissolved into something warped and acidic, and the air thinned until every breath felt borrowed. Tessa's grip tightened on my wrist with a desperation I had never felt from her before, and her pupils were blown wide like she was staring into dark that wasn't there. Across the room, another masked man poured something from a pitcher into random cups, and people kept drinking without noticing the shift in the atmosphere. Bodies staggered. A girl dressed as an angel hiccuped, and sat abruptly on the floor as if strings had been cut from her limbs. Laughter twisted into groans. People slumped mid-dance, mid-sentence, mid-smile, like puppets, losing tension, all at once. We tried to move toward the stairs, but the house pulsed around us in a nauseating wave, and the fog felt alive as it curled around our legs. The floor buckled, my vision split, and Tessa whispered my name like it was the only thing keeping her upright. A masked man glided through the crowd, pitcher tipping effortlessly, expression unchanged. No one seemed to question him. No one seemed capable of it anymore. We pushed forward, our bodies sluggish, barely ours. A hand grabbed my elbow, wrong hand, wrong angle, wrong strength, and a masked face leaned close, breath minty and too calm. "Party's rolling," he murmured in a bored monotone, and something inside me cracked with cold terror. That was the moment I realized we were trapped, and no one around us understood what was happening. Then, just before the panic fully swallowed me, silence dropped through the room like a guillotine. Then, silence swallowed everything. The silence didn't last. It stretched just long enough to make my heartbeat feel like an alarm inside my ribs. And then the chaos surged back, sharper voices warped, bodies stumbling, the floor swimming beneath our feet. Every sound felt scraped raw, every shadow leaned too close, and the blank masks moved through it all with eerie purpose, untouched by the confusion grinding through the room. Their calmness was worse than any scream. My steps shortened into frantic, uneven bursts. The walls seemed to sway, the ceiling pulsed. Tessa's nails dug into my arm so hard I thought she'd break the skin, and her breath hitched in jagged slices. "Focus. Stay with me." I whispered, though my voice sounded underwater. The mask nearest us angled his head, tracking us with an almost curious ease as he poured more of that red liquid into cups. People cheered through slurred voices. A pirate toppled sideways into a chair. A goblin fell to his knees laughing before his laughter stopped mid. We fought for the stairs, stumbling through the bodies, swaying like wilted puppets. The fog rolled thick along the floor, and for one moment I swear I saw a pair of hands dragging through it, only to blink and realize it was just someone crawling aimlessly. Tessa kept whispering my name like a chant, anchoring her, but her legs buckled every few steps. I held her upright with muscles that felt full of sand. At the stairs, a woman dressed as Cleopatra slumped sideways, mumbling nonsense, her wig slipping off as she tried to stand. The house groaned around us, the music slowing until each beat was a sludge-heavy thud. The fog machine choked in fits, releasing bursts of breath that curled like living things. Every instinct inside me screamed run, but my body disobeyed, lagging behind my thoughts as if separated by seconds. We spotted the small bathroom and lunged toward it just as one of the masked men stepped out, blocking the doorway with one hand. "Staff only," he said, which made no sense in a house. His voice was syrup-slow and uninterested, like he was bored with the whole scenario. Tessa shoved past him with a strength I didn't know she still had, and we slammed the door behind us just as he pressed a palm to the other side of it. The lock clicked, fragile and small, but it held. Inside, the bathroom felt suffocating, cinnamon candle melting into thick wax, a fan barely spinning, walls closing in. Tessa gripped the counter with trembling fingers, her breath hitching. "They drugged us," she said, voice quivering, leaving crescent-shaped dents in her thigh as she tried to ground herself. My phone slipped from my numb hands and clattered, screen cracking like an omen. Tessa grabbed it, dialing 911 with shaking fingers, and handed it back. I pressed it to my ear. The world twisted. 911, what's your emergency? 3616 Oak Drive, I croaked. What's your emergency? Drugged. The phone slipped again. A knock tapped the bathroom door, to knuckles, precise, rhythmic, almost polite. "Open up," the voice murmured. Tessa pressed her palm against the lock, shaking. I whispered for them to go away. Another knock, this time sharper. The knob rattled violently, and the door jumped in its frame as someone threw a shoulder into it. We braced it with our weight because our muscles were barely responding anymore. Outside, something heavy dragged across the hallway. A stifled sob, a man whispering. A bottle shattered. Laughter twisted into something feral. The masked men moved through the house like wolves, coordinated and sober, unfazed by the mess they'd orchestrated. My body sagged against the door as the drug took deeper root. My arms tingled. My lips felt soft and numb. Tessa pressed her forehead to mine, tears streaking into her glitter. "We're not going out there. No, we're not. Eyes, throat, teeth," she whispered. "Our last survival plan." I held her hand until my knuckles cracked. Time warped. Minutes melted. The house groaned with destruction. We sat on the cold tile in rigid silence, breaths growing thinner, listening to the villains who wore blank anonymity like armor. Then something shifted, a distant hum slicing through the night. Sirens. Blue light flickered dimly through the frosted bathroom window, pulsing like salvation. The house erupted, feet pounding, shouts rising, commands snapping, sharp. Someone smashed a window. Someone screamed for real this time. A masked man slammed a palm against the bathroom door one last time, letting out a frustrated groan as he slid downward. Then he ran. The front door burst open. Police rushed in. Bodies collided. Furniture collapsed. Orders ricocheted through the house in fierce waves. Tessa muttered a half-formed prayer against my shoulder, and I held on to her as if my grip alone tethered us to the world. A knock hit the door. Firm. Official. Grounding. "Police. Anybody in there?" "Yes," I whispered back. My hands barely worked. The latch twisted slowly, and the door opened to a wall of uniforms, lights, and raised guns. They pulled us out gently, voices low and careful, guiding us past overturned furniture, unconscious partygoers, shattered decorations, and abandoned masks glinting in the ruined fog. One mask lay directly in my path, streaked with red, its plastic mouth curled in a blank, indifferent slit. I couldn't stop staring at it, because the lack of expression was worse than any face could have been. It wasn't human, it wasn't angry, it wasn't afraid, it was nothing. And nothing is the most terrifying thing a person can wear. The police later said the masked men were career criminals hitting multiple parties that night. Opportunists using Halloween as a perfect cover. No names, no faces, no arrests, just blank masks. and the knowledge that somewhere out there they were still moving through the dark, waiting for the next house full of people too distracted to notice the taste in their drinks. Would you dare return to a place like that? Before you go, listen closely. If the horrors you witnessed tonight have left your pulse unsteady and your mind questioning what truly hides behind the digital veil, then you're not done yet. Darkness doesn't vanish when the screen fades, it just waits for you to follow it deeper. There's another story I need you to see, one that drags you out of the digital shadows and into the nightmare of Halloween night itself. Watch *7 True Halloween Night Horror Stories that will haunt you forever *. It's waiting for you right here on the end screen, but be warned. That video carries a different kind of fear. The kind that stays with you long after the night is over. And if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe to Scary Dark Narrations *. Every night, we explore real encounters that slip through the cracks of our world, stories that most people are too afraid to tell. Tap the bell icon so the next tale finds you the moment the darkness begins to whisper again. Until then, keep your lights dim, your mind alert, and your doors locked, because once you've heard the things we share here, the shadows never truly leave you alone.